Hey everybody, welcome back to the Good Doctor's continuing coverage of Hulu's Mrs. America. I am Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And we are talking today about episode 4, which is entitled Betty, and covers the time in the ERA ratification process right after Roe versus Wade was decided in the Supreme Court. So we actually open up with Phyllis finding out that abortion is now legal in these United States. She handles it as well as you would think she would.
She's not happy about it.
Not particularly happy. Something else Phyllis is also potentially not happy about is finding out that her son is gay, which...
Yeah, that was a plot twist at the end of the show, huh?
That was something. So in terms of Phyllis, her big thing this episode is that she is going to debate Betty Friedan. Mm-hmm. The debate goes well for Phyllis.
Yeah, I mean, like, Betty pretty much wins until the end.
Until the end. And then Betty Bettied herself.
Yeah,
Yeah. So the deal is really what this episode is kind of communicating all over the place is that women are not a monolith.
Yeah. Even
though a lot of people like to pretend they are. And one of the ways they really put a button on it that I thought was wonderful and kind of creative is that they had one of the writers, whose name I actually never caught. I never heard if they used a name.
Margaret,
thank you.
I wrote it down this time because I was like, we're going to talk about this because it's a really key moment of the episode.
So Margaret brings up tokenism as a thing she could write about for Ms. Magazine and has to explain what tokenism is, which is expecting one member of a minority group to speak for the entire minority group.
Yeah.
And she is very clearly the token black lady in the Ms. office.
Yeah. And
the white ladies in there don't think of her that way at all.
Yeah, and it was so interesting to watch their faces, just like they have no concept of what tokenism is. And then they immediately get defensive, right? Which is a huge problem with any sort of intersection with race and gender politics, is that when people think that they're liberal about one of those things and they get maybe shown that they might not be so liberal on one of the other things, then they get really defensive. So the idea that they could possibly have tokenistic representation in Ms., like, no.
Of course not, because we're the bastion of liberal, blah, 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 blah.
We're the liberal women's movement, and this is Ms. Magazine. And, like, it was so brilliantly acted by the person who plays Margaret, because, like, you could see her face just completely go, like, oh, I shouldn't have brought it up. Like, yeah.
But then of course, what's fascinating is that, like, she brings up that a movement isn't a monolith.
Yeah.
And then what we're shown constantly is that none of these movements are monoliths.
Right.
And so we have this constant, like, not even in the conservative stop ERA is there a full understanding. And I think, I guess that's just what I really loved about this particular episode was how they were able to, with almost every scene, show how incredibly complicated this is. Yeah. And yet at the same time, the debate in a lot of ways boils it down. This is about, do you believe that women should have a choice regarding their profession and their destiny, or do you believe that society knows best?
Right.
That's it. That's what it boils down to. But the nuances of that are so complicated.
And I think for me, like, one of the things that it showed too, right, because the previous episode on Shirley Chisholm and this episode as well deal with the intersection of gender and race in the women's movement. And that's a huge one because as the show is showing us, the second wave feminism wasn't intersectional and did pretty badly on race issues, and including Black women's and Black voices in the experience. But this episode is also about the intersection of age and gender in a lot of ways, because you get this contrast between the perception of Gloria Steinem and the sexualization of Gloria Steinem and her experience running Ms. Magazine and the threats that they get, and then Betty Friedan's experience as two women of different kind of generations and perspectives, both seen as leaders of this movement and both trying to find like a voice for themselves and a place for themselves.
Yeah, it's I thought it was really interesting too, this idea that no one ever thanked Betty, really, like no one in the movement did.
Yeah.
And that was really important. Like I was saying to Dr. Aaron offline that I never really considered how utterly exhausting Betty Friedan's life must have been after she published The Feminine Mystique.
Yeah.
And just the idea of being, and we've heard other people that started movements, we've even heard Colin Kaepernick talk about this recently, that the role of being both a person and a figurehead is really exhausting. And you don't really ever, you never stop performing, you're always on, that kind of thing. And Betty is very clearly always on.
Yeah.
But she's also not a prototype feminist. Like she's also, in ways, we would call her very retrograde in some ways. And no one knows what we're doing, I think, is the other thing that this hit me. Like we're all fumbling our way through this.
Yeah. And like, from my perspective, as you know, looking back at history, you kind of see and think of feminists, particularly at this stage of, you know, being liberal and open-minded on a lot of things. And some of the things that got brought up in this show as well, that showcase that, like, you know, Betty thinks differently than a lot of other feminists, is the kind of inclusion of the LGBTQ plus peoples in these movements, both within white feminism and Black feminism. And you see that dealt with in this episode as well. And so, you know, yeah, we're looking at her as liberal-minded women going, yeah, she is one of the founders of the women's movement, but she also was anti-gay, you know, at the same time. And so the show continues to show how complex humans are. And like you said, like there is no monolith. There is no one feminist prototype. Everybody are human beings that have different opinions, and they're all trying to navigate large scale societal change.
So in the middle of this, we also see something that a lot of women in the world are very familiar with right now, which is getting sexually harassed via print media in some way, shape, or form. So Ms. Magazine is the target of, I would imagine, some men's rights activists, even though we didn't use that language in the 70s and we use it now. There's not a whole lot of public women that I know who have not gotten phone calls like that, or gotten emails, or gotten really, really creepy packages in the mail. I've certainly gotten lots of DMs that have been very gross, to put it very kindly. So,
yeah.
And that's an important part of this process too. Like you hear people asking why some of those women were so angry all the time. Well, they were getting angry stuff, and it's hard to not feel attacked when you actually are being attacked by some people.
And the danger of kind of putting your head above the parapet, right?
Yep. Yeah, like what's her face that I didn't, again, I'm terrible with names right now, COVID brain, but who tells Gloria like she risked everything and none of us thank her.
Yeah, we get to do what we do because she risked everything. Yeah, I don't know her Betty's friend.
Who looked vaguely like Kristen Wiig, like enough like Kristen Wiig that I Googled if it was Kristen Wiig.
Oh, so. Like, wait a second. Yeah, but like, and that's, you know, we get to do what we do because she risked everything, but there's still a lot of risk involved, and that's what this episode shows us, that, you know, if you're putting yourself forward as a public figure, you're risking backlash and criticism, just like what happened with Phyllis and Betty going for Stop ERA for its associations with the John Birch Society, and then insinuating that they were also connected to the Ku Klux Klan. So anytime...
The connection between the John Birch Society and the Ku Klux Klan is something that I've heard other people make as a way to... The John Birch Society probably, like a lot of other societies, has some members that may belong to both. Like,
right.
It's not even neoconservative, it's paleoconservative.
Yeah, I did not know what that was until we Googled the John Birch Society 20 minutes ago. I was like, okay.
So it believes strongly in limited government, and strongly in a Christocentric America, strongly in a lot of things that also align with some of the values of stated white supremacy movements. So sure, there's probably overlap, but to my Google knowledge, and then some other things I saw just really, really briefly about this episode, that's one of those things that people throw around a lot, but has not always been able to be proven.
Yeah.
But there is membership overlap from what people have discovered.
Yeah, and I think, you know, tactically, Betty was just trying to tank the Stop ERA movement, and, you know, saying that they're supported by the John Birch Society isn't as damaging as saying they're supported by the Klan. So it wasn't a stretch for her to kind of...
Yeah, she just decided that's what it was like.
She was going to make that insinuation with the hopes of damaging the Stop ERA campaign.
And the thing with the Stop ERA campaign is that everybody kept, until the very end of this episode, and I'm really excited to see where this goes, one of the major problems and the reason it kept getting the attraction it did is that everybody kept underestimating Phyllis.
Yeah.
And the Variety recap, long may we trust Variety, talks a lot about how this episode shows that women eat our own.
Yeah.
And I think you and I are generation of fourth wave feminists, sure, whatever, who has any, I'm a wave of something. I wave. We do the wave, we do the feminist wave.
We do the feminist wave.
I certainly know that one of the things that I was told as I was becoming like a professional woman, like in my early 20s, was a way to set myself apart was to be somebody who shared power with other women.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking of, why wouldn't I do that? And then learning that like no one else did, and this whole thing of pulling the ladder up behind you and how that had been a really generational thing. And I'd always kind of wondered, well, why didn't people just create more room at the table? Like why is this why were we so bad? And then I look at what this show is portraying and I'm like, oh, because we were all trying to decide exactly what being a woman meant, and we hadn't gotten to the point yet where we were allowed to have multiple definitions.
Yeah, it is a zero-sum argument.
Yeah,
in the 70s for women, right?
For women.
Yeah.
And I think probably in the 90s too. I'm not interested in zero-sum arguments.
No, there is not a right or a wrong way to be a woman.
Mm-mm.
At all.
At all.
Yeah.
Including if you were biologically born one or not.
Yes, 100% so. But, you know, we're coming at this from this kind of evolved understanding of 2020, watching this happen in the 70s. And like... So
it's fascinating to watch. Like, I've never really looked at 70s feminism in this way before.
Yeah.
I don't think we haven't been given the opportunity to.
I know.
The show has really done a lot of work.
It has done a lot of work. Yeah, it's fascinating to get this insight, and I think they're doing it empathetically with the way they develop characters. As much as parts of Betty Friedan's character in this show I find annoying or infuriating, like this was an empathetic portrayal of her, and they really wanted you to understand where she was coming from. And
I don't feel like they're falsely softening anyone's edges.
No.
But they are trying to remind all of us that they are human with very human motivations.
Yeah. And that, you know, I think that kind of the scenes of Betty like reflecting on her journey to become this celebrated author, but then like, what does she have after it? You know, like, yeah, so she's Betty Friedan and she gets recognized on the street, but she's also very lonely.
Her life looks terrible, to be honest.
Yeah, and she feels kind of pushed aside by this movement that she was really influential in forming. It was gracious, I thought, a gracious way to end the episode to have Gloria call her and say, like, I never told you that the feminine mystique changed my life. And to say to her, like, I would have called Phyllis Schlafly much worse than a witch. Like, it was nice to see that kind of a realization happen for Gloria, that like, you know what, we have more in common than we have that divides us, and I can call her and be gracious about this.
Yeah. So all in all, a continually fascinating portrayal of a time in history that we never know enough about.
Yeah.
And we're going to look forward to episode 5.
Maybe we'll talk about Bella. Who knows?
Who knows? We'll probably definitely still talk about Phyllis.
Oh, yeah.
So guys, have a great week until then, and we'll see you for episode 5.
Bye.
Bye.